Excellent. Thank you very much. Right, so I'm Stuart Mackintosh, and I'm here to talk about the Perl and Raku Foundation. It's going to be quite a short presentation, a few slides, but then what I'm really interested to do here is have a conversation. So it's not, normally this is much more of a broadcast, people do presentations, but I want to hear what people here have got to say. What do you want from the foundation? So just think about the content of the slides, whatever it is that's in your mind, and when I've finished, let's talk. Okay, so the Perl and Raku Foundation is, the formal legal name is Yet Another Society, which of course follows a theme there, registered in North America. It's changed, the name, the doing business as name was changed to the Perl and Raku Foundation for a period of time. We're reviewing that in about a year's time to see whether that's worked or not worked. At the time we proposed it, it was somewhat contentious. So again, this is good to get feedback on. Everyone on the board is a volunteer, so there's no paid board members. There are paid people doing key tasks to support the organisation. And it says yet another society, maybe it should have been yet another community. The Perl and Raku Foundation is a community of people who are doing a different kind of thing to the technical communities. Being volunteer operated is both an opportunity and a risk. It's a strength and a weakness. So there's no reliance on a single company, a single donor. The foundation is not in anyone's pocket, so it keeps the autonomy. It also means that if the funds get changed, it doesn't affect the ability for the organisation to operate. So there's a strength, but it's also a weakness because it doesn't allow us to do all the things we want to do. So that is the makeup of the foundation. What does the foundation do? Governance, that's managing things like the SOC, the Standards of Conduct process, which one of the board members is leading. And that is for the foundation and the areas that the foundation covers, like some of the conferences. It doesn't affect any other organisation or community who's not working, not funded by the foundation or is independent. Organisational support, the bank manager for the funding, legal and IPR. So these are the kind of activities that are not part of the technical work that many people do. These are the activities that sit outside that. Key priority is about the funding. I'll talk more about funding in a minute, but it's been, there's lots of change in the last few years in the industry. The way the funding flows, the way corporations work has changed. So our key role is to manage that. One of the things we've done this year to increase our efforts and our ability to manage this fundraising is we've appointed a fundraiser lead who's Olaf, many of you know, also heavily involved in Meta-CPAN. So he's leading the outreach to the sponsors, and he's talking to some of the key sponsors to make sure we're in a good position there. Other priorities we have in addition to what we've got on here there's community grants as well, and of course promoting Perl and Raku. Priority number 2, funding core maintenance grants. That is also, again, top of the list of what the foundation is there to do, is to make sure we keep that going. Some of the things that we're currently working on, it's Perl's 40th birthday soon, so we've got a few years still, but it's time to start thinking about what needs to happen there. So if you have ideas, then do get in touch. There's a prospectus, an initiative from one of the community members to put together a prospectus. It's on the website. It's a very smart document. It's well presented, and it's useful to give out, again, for the corporates so that they can see that there is a professional, smart, addressable organisation, piece of information. It's a really useful internal sales tool, and we're developing other internal sales tools for people who work for larger organisations to give to their managers, their open source program offices, or whoever it is now, to help them understand that why Perl and Raku are important and how to fund them. So we're developing that pack now. I've got a note there, share your content. What we would like to do with the prospectus is put more information in it about what people are doing on the ground. So there's a lot of Perl applications that are often used that people haven't thought about. They're very popular. So the more, if you have content that you'd like to have put in the prospectus, then the foundation would be very interested in publishing that as well. Supporting infrastructure, community engagements. There's a couple of other things on here. We've got Open Source Pledge, which is a new initiative from a chap who's for a long time been interested in how corporates can value how they should fund open source. So recently, the Open Source Pledge was launched. It argues that if you have 20 developers, you should be funding around $2,000 per developer per year to the open source community. And that's not through them, that's the company should fund at that level. That's the way they've valued that. And so that could mean that the money might go to one of the foundations or to maintainers. So that's what the Open Source Pledge is. We were one of the handful of organizations who supported the initial launch of that. And DPI, DPG registration. So the United Nations have now recognized open source as what's called digital public infrastructure. That's a very big subject. It's well worth the research if you're interested in the broader sense free and open source software. So we're looking at how Perl can be part of that digital public infrastructure, that set of resources, of assets. So the industry's changed a lot in the last few years, not only with pandemic resetting, all sorts of things, but supply chain risks have changed completely. The world, I think with the pandemic, one of the results of that is that the world is more digital. It was a reluctant shift to becoming more digital. There's more reliance on technology, and of course, when there's more value in the digital landscape generally, then the people who want to profit from that by abusing it, there's going to be more focus. There's more records digitally stored. There's more data that people can take. And so there's all sorts of compromises regularly. Every week, if you read the security news, there'll be another typo squatting name in a node repository or something like that. These are happening all the time. I monitor this. I don't see a great deal of Perl security issues reported, but certainly across the various other languages and libraries, there's many risks. This becomes quite important when you consider the new European regulation. So in order for us as citizens rather than developers to trust technology, trust our government's storing of our records in their databases or whoever the corporate might be, the European regulation is developing very fast. It has been since probably the last 5 years, but it's become at the point now where I think December this year, the Cyber Resilience Act will finally come into force. And over the next 2 or 3 years, it will get to the point where it's a requirement for organizations to have undertook certain steps. For example, things like having a bill of material. How do you know what's in your software? And within the next 2 years, software used across Europe will require, for example, if there's a vulnerability discovered somewhere up the supply chain, somehow that needs to be communicated to the users of the software or to the people who provide the software, and they can decide if they should notify their users if there's an impact. The complexity of this, you can imagine, can be quite large because the stack is deep, and it may well be that there's a Perl module that relies on a piece of C code which has turned out to have a problem with it, and somehow if it's discovered, if the person who writes that code discovers that problem, they have to somehow notify upstream, and that might then mean CPAN, it could be Perl, it could be the applications built on Perl, it could be affect the end user. So these are the kind of things which will become very important in the next 2 years. So Europe are leading the way in this. They're creating a new software liability regulation, and that software liability is, if you're familiar with the CE mark, we're talking about CE marks for software. And if anyone was around in the 90s when CE marks came in, you may remember the shift in industry at that point in time. That's happening to software. So again, if you just sit and think about that, you'll realize quite how impactful that's going to be. UK, US are going to have similar things as well. Funding for open source. So there's challenges across foundations, GNOME, KDE foundations, FSFE, Python, they're all reporting that they're struggling with funding and it's affecting what they're doing. But in addition to that, there's also new opportunities, and I'm going to talk about some of the new opportunities next. The Perl and Raku Foundation have provided various community grants over the years. They're generally quite small. There's not many of them because it's more with the surplus funds once the core maintainers and the organisation funds are covered. So I wanted to share with you some of the other funds that are available, again, European-based. But there is a lot of money starting to flow. So if you are looking to get funding to do work on open source, that could well be something related to Perl or CPAN, then they're an example of some of the funds. And a lot of these are quite low friction. Sometimes people think these are very complicated to apply for. Some of these are very, very straightforward. So again, follow up if you want more detail. And there's lots of others as well. Dino is interesting. That's the French ministry. And what they're doing is, if it turns out that the French government uses your software, your open source, they'll pay you. That's one of the examples of what's going on in Europe. There's lots of similar examples. So we can talk about more of that if you want information. And also further funding changes as well. This does matter because this is the changing in the face of how open source is funded. One of the key changes, I mentioned digital public goods, is that open source is now on the radar of every large company, every public administration, where a few years ago it was very much focused on the big corporations who they were paying their bills to. It's now become apparent that that isn't enough, that actually open source is what runs everything. So there are more funds coming through, quite significant, which will flow through to the open source communities. So again, it's important that the people in the Perl and Raku communities understand this and access these, because if you don't, then someone else will, and you know, it's important to be well aware of this. It's recognised that free and open source software runs almost everything, and we mustn't understate where Perl sits in that. You know, I talk to many organisations, governments, all sorts of people, and almost everywhere you go, the thing somehow depends on Perl, or it's in there somewhere as a. I said the phrase a few years ago, and I'll reiterate, if you were to turn Perl off, not that you could, but if you were to turn Perl and CPAN and it all off, there's a lot of things that would stop working out there. So we mustn't forget that, and we do need to, as a community, take advantage of these opportunities. And of course, sustainability is becoming understood as well now. That I've heard the phrase often where, again, organisations, large organisations, or even governments will say, we'll write a spec and the open source community will deliver it. Because, of course, open source is free. But what they miss is that the software might be free because you've written it once and it's too cheap to measure the copying of it. But the human investment in getting to that point is priceless. It's a completely different dimension. You couldn't pay someone to spend 30 years studying a very focused, nuanced computing point of fact or algorithm. It just doesn't work like that. So it's starting to be recognised now anyway. So there's a bit of an update. Foundation, what can you do to support the foundation? Well, certainly sponsorships. I think that's most important. What can you do to think about who do you work for, work with? Who are the people who are using Perl and Raku? Who benefits from it? Who would be disrupted if it wasn't there, if there was no core maintenance, if the great work that Paul and others are doing wasn't funded, wasn't supported, if these organisations weren't making that happen? If you think about how much the funding, how small it is compared to the output, the disparity is absolutely huge. So think about who that is and let the foundation know, and they can work with you to see how we can talk to whoever it is who may be the benefactor, talk to OLAF as well. And we're very respectful of, it's not a sales activity. I sometimes talk in business terms, but this is a partnership. This is about helping them understand how these security issues are going to be managed, helping understand what they need and how Perl can continue to deliver that. Certainly marketing and content is useful. I mentioned the prospectus, but the more we can all do to explain what Perl does, how it's used. I was just talking with Paul a moment ago, how is it people can understand why Perl might be the best choice for them to use? There are reasons to use other languages, but what are the reasons to use Perl, and how can we document that and share it with other people? We have a monthly call, so that's Friday. I think it's the third Friday of the month in the afternoon, in the evening. So you can always join on that. It's quite a small group, maybe, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 people, something in that range, and it's where people will come with an idea. If someone comes along with an idea that's going to affect other people, I'll generally encourage them to come to that meeting and share it, so that the peers, other people who are impacted, can comment on it as well. So that's a good place to go. That's where we also have the Slack as well, where you can join in and communicate with various people. And if you don't like the idea of Slack, then there's other things we can talk about as well. So that is all I wanted to share from my list. I don't think there's anything else that you couldn't just discover by yourself. But what I want to do is now have the opportunities to hear what people have got to say. What do you want to see the foundation do? What could it change? What helps you? What are your ideas? So over to you for questions. Lee has a microphone. Yes. Oh, just.
This is just for the recordings. It's not for the PA system. So you still have to
speak up. Hi there.
Hello.
I was wondering, what's the foundation doing to attract basically new people to Perl and Raku?
So
because,
yeah.
I mean, just first of all, I'd say, can we get some of the resources updated to not look like the 90s intranet?
Yeah. Okay, good point. Okay, so the question there, what can the foundation do to attract new people into the communities? And for example, you mentioned that some of the places on the internet are not very modern and could put people off. Yeah, okay, so the first part, what can we do? Well, I think communication, the foundation could do with some guidance. It's been very much North America focused for quite some time. It's really about what can we collectively do? How can the foundation support people who have ideas? There was ideas from the foundation to talk to universities about getting, for example, for the conference, engaging with universities and inviting people, students to come along. Because it's a volunteer-led, we don't have resources, we can't send people out, but what we can do is support initiatives. So if you have an initiative, if you have a thought where you can say, well, if I had some support, if I had this, I would be able to do that, then the foundation will support you to do that. As far as the resources, yes, there are some resources which are very old. There's kind of two sides to that. One is, certainly they're not in the control of the foundation, and it would be wrong for the foundation to impose any direction on those organisations. But on the other, there's this interesting change in the market that there's only so modern you can get, and there's only so many ways you can make your website even more modern, that sometimes there's a contrast where these things that look like they've been there for a long time, it evidences the foundational nature of Perl. So I was very much concerned a while ago that they did look quite old, but sometimes that can work to its favour. I don't know the right answer to that one. You may send a message to these organisations. It may be, if the answer is, we would if only we had a style sheet, then maybe the foundation can help with a style sheet that'd be consistent. So let's talk, and I'm really interested to hear your initiative and talk about the detail of what it is you think we could do, and anyone else who wants to get involved in such a thing.
Thank you.
You mentioned about funding.
Yes.
So I've been working on a project for a while. I could do with some funding.
Yeah.
And I think it could be, I could market it. But the problem is I don't want to spend all of my time chasing down funding instead of doing the project. Is there some way in which the foundation can, or is there somebody there that I can talk to who can say, okay, this is worth going forward on, and why don't you try and apply to this place? Because you've just given a huge list there. I'm trying to work out which of those, you know, I could sort of apply to.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. Well, that's the reason I wanted to share this is because some of these funds are low effort, low resistance. You'll know quickly. They're designed for developers to apply for. They're not designed for your normal, typical 30 pages. It's a one-sheet application. The way to think about these funds is the best way to apply to achieve funding is to not try and adapt to the funder, but to be absolutely focused on what it is you're trying to do. And it may be that you need to explain or find a way of explaining the impact to others, what's the benefits of your funding, maybe for the public, for the citizen, the economic benefits. But don't change what you're doing to fit a fund, because that they look out for that and they'll generally sense that. As far as what to do with these, send me a note. We have Olaf, who's helping us generally with the sponsorship and funding. It may well be that between Olaf and I, we can help you align with a fund which would support what you're doing, give you an idea of saying, well, you know, we know this is likely to go ahead, or that one's not worth it. So I think get in touch.
Basically, it would be a good idea if you could put somewhere into you know, onto the website or wherever you have it, or a link to which, you know, emails could be sent.
Yes, well, I mean, you can.
I know that means somebody has to look at them and
email
apply.
me is the answer. My email is on the last slide, but you can email me on that.
I'll
That's
do that.
perfectly all right.
Yeah.
These change quickly. You can see the dates on these. You know, these
Yeah.
are all up in the next, and that's, don't let that put you off. You can, if you've got the right project, you can apply in a day. But you know, this changes rapidly. In a month's time, it will be a different list. So this is why it's difficult to publish this. But if you were to drop me an email, then I can show you what these are. We can have a conversation, join in Slack. But do apply for it. People in the Perl and Raku communities should be applying for these and should be taking this money.
Is there anything happening with the code of conduct? If it has, it's not been made known.
Yes. Okay. Is anything happening with the code of conduct? Yes, there is. One of our board members, Ruth, has recently redrafted the standards of conduct. I think everybody knows it's difficult. It's difficult to retrofit rules around a community. That's the problem. So if you start a community from scratch with, okay, if you walk into this room, if you walk into my pub, these are the rules. We are going to drink beer and throw chairs. That's the rules. Yeah. But if I was to come back later and add those rules in where everyone's very happy sitting there quietly, it's going to upset people. So that's the problem, is retrofitting rules to communities who have their own local ways of doing things. And you know, the foundation have tried in the past, and it has, for various reasons, it's been difficult. So that's why there's not big announcements. The foundation isn't standing up and saying, we're going to now set the rules for everything. It's never, that's not going to work. But there is an update to the standard of conduct, and again, Ruth is the person to speak to on the board. This was in effect for the last conference in the States, and I think the other thing to talk about is the standard of conduct is it's two things. Just with any project, you've got to set up an operation. Writing the rules is one thing, but the execution is actually the important piece. And what it needs is a team, a response team, who are there to receive the message and know how to do it. So that's the hardest piece. But again, that's in place, and Ruth is the person to talk to on that. So if you have any particular questions, concerns, that's where to go. Right, what else?
Okay, thank you. I have the stick. First thing is people can take me outside and stone me after for this.
Thank you for that offer.
I'm a traitor. I've used Perl probably for 30 years. I'm semi-retired. I've used Python a lot more recently, for example, because there are no APIs published for Perl for half the things I use. I do a lot of SMS, for example. Most of that is Python, so I think, yeah, I'll use Python. So what this comes to is, has anyone done a SWOT for both Perl and maybe for Raku? Because, for example, I don't see any reason currently why I should be interested in Raku. Perl has been one of my central languages for 30 years, but it's declined, and admittedly I'm semi-retired. So it's more attracting people in the future, moving it up the TOB index, et cetera, because we got direct feedback from there. Sorry, I'll stop now because I'm beginning to ramble.
That's all right, thank you. Traditionally, there's been competition, there's been, is it Perl or is it Python, and lots of kind of contention, friction, but they're not really, you would use them potentially for different reasons. And from talking to people who use Perl, it is more about how the human connects to the computer rather than how the computer executes code, because code's code, CPUs are CPUs, it doesn't really matter at that level what you use to make it. It's more about how the human is going to express their intent, and if Perl fits well, then that's good. If Python is more your thing, then that's also okay. We shouldn't think about them as it's this or that. It's not a zero-sum game from that respect. But it's also true that, of course, there are gaps. Some of the documentation is old. And I'll just come back to the TOB index, for example, just for a minute, and we'll go back to that. Perl isn't up there maybe as it was, but there's a lot of Perl out there. It may not be as actively, there may not be as many people writing every day, but as far as the latent code out there, if you were to measure how many things rely on Perl, it's quite significant and probably, well, absolutely greater than some of the other languages on that index. So that index gives you one dimension. It doesn't give you other dimensions which could also be measured and maybe more valuable. But it is in the popular media, it is used as the pop chart. So that's what people use. And Raku is for different things as well. Raku was certainly very much focused on future problems, and it doesn't have the base that Perl has. So they have very different challenges, different opportunities, and so on. But Perl will still be doing what it's doing in 100 years' time. I've got no doubt about that. But the central point about documentation, APIs, and so on, well, I suppose the foundation, if there's proposals for funding to address some of these issues, then the foundation could well be interested in that, or some of these other funds as well. I guess we need someone who wants that to happen. Someone who says, right, if I'm paid, I will make that happen. And what we might be able to do through the foundation is work with someone who has that intent to help them achieve it. The foundation doesn't do the technical stuff. We're not going to write that documentation. But if we can bring people together, if we can be a center for getting the minds together, bringing the funding in, and creating a community who's going to do that, then of course we'll be very happy to do that. What we need is leaders. We need people who will take that mission and say, I'm going to make it happen, and the funding does follow. But you need that leader. That's the critical piece. If you can find that person who is compelled to do that, then people will get behind them and make it happen. So that's I think the answer to that problem. But again, if you want to explore and discuss it, get involved, join the monthly meeting, join Slack, have the conversations. Okay, do we have any other questions or anything you want to know? And if not, we have got, okay.
Just sort of following on from a couple of those questions, it sometimes feels like there's maybe focus on funding, but the thing that I see with Perl is there's a lot of really experienced people that often don't have something in CPAN, for example. So you might be looking for something on SMSs or somebody on some cloud stuff, whatever. And the knowledge is sort of often there, but I think that somebody's putting quite a low level into their own code because they just needed to hack some solution. But I don't know that somebody else would find that useful, if you see what I mean. And sometimes I think it's about communication, about how do we find out what other people might find useful. What do they want? They need a resource, not necessarily funding. It might just be a person to look at this for like a couple of days. And that's sometimes the thing I think we could communicate better, but I'm not sure how to have that information between people. No, just a quick.
Yeah, so just to play that back then, so your comment was around how knowledge can be found, discovered, shared, yeah. Well, I suppose 30 years ago, 20 years ago, the people with the knowledge were in connection with each other. They knew who they were, and it was, you know, quite clear. The world is a bigger place. The digital world is a bigger place. It's, as far as I can see, it is a limitation, more of a human limitation than anything else. That how does one find specific detailed information that exists somewhere else in the world? Or in this case, as you say, someone might have written the code, but it might not be a module. Someone might have written a module, but it may not be clear what it does. So the answer might be there. The CPAN was when you knew who the authors were and you could ask someone, oh, go to CPAN, you'll find this module, there's the answer. Then, of course, Meta CPAN with additional resources to help you find things came along. Is it time for a Meta CPAN? I don't know. But what is the discoverability process? So yeah, I accept the point. It's a really good thing to share and amongst your peers to find out what the ideas are. I agree it would help. I don't know the answer, but I think the question's a good one, and I think it would be, if there's a thing to raise, it is a case of how, exactly as you say, how do we do that? What needs to happen? What is the what is the ability to enable this discovery? Is it publishing? There's various work around the metadata, which you'll hear in various conversations today. Some of it because of the SBOMs. The Salve's amazing work with the CPAN security group. In order for that to work, you need metadata. And of course, other people are talking about metadata. You need the license information and so on. So could it be that there's metadata that could help this be discovered? And once you have that metadata in a structured semantic way, is there then an easier way of discovering it and linking it and graphing these things together? I don't know. But again, just as before, you need a leader, you need someone who's going to say, well, given that metadata, I'm going to solve that problem, and making it their mission. And the foundation will do what it can to support that. Okay. Is there, I think we're coming to time, but do we have anything else? We probably have another.
Sorry, I'm just coming back to this, gentleman.
Yes, of course.
Is that in the old days it was internet relay chat?
Yes.
And, you know, maybe nowadays I've got, because I run a science fair in one of the local boroughs here, I've got a Mastodon, which is a tiny little Mastodon. Maybe we should have a Perl Mastodon. Just saying.
Well, yes, okay, so, well, that's exactly the point. This is the problem. So the question there is, should we have a community channel? Now, of course, yeah, you have Mastodon, but actually you have 20 other chats. You know, I have on my phone all the different things. Well, indeed. But that is again, a general problem. And again, across Europe, there's a lot more in Europe than there is the UK with standardization, with coming away from all these. I mean, ISC, of course, was designed around, you have a node, and the way it worked was not, you could talk between nodes, but it was a different system. It wasn't as, you have that balance of centralization and federation, but then of course you've got things like Matrix, which has a different way of working. There does need to be generally better ways of people communicating. We shouldn't have to have all these different chat programs. You may have noticed in the news, Google's potentially going to get broken up. It will have to maybe open its XMPP interfaces. You know, there's all these other things that may happen in the future. As always, make these things happen. With the free and open source world, there's nothing stopping people from making things happen. All it needs is a leader initially with an idea who wants the thing to happen. If everyone came together and said, let's all be on the same chat system, then, you know, the foundation again can be the center and help coordinate so that we don't end up with everyone just on their own 20 different, you know, just to move the problem to the side. We can bring that more centrally. So bring your ideas and let's make these things happen. Okay. Any final comments, or are we? I think we're about at time. Okay, all right. Well, thank you all very much.